I heard a noise outside the hospital room while caring for my grandfather. It was 3 in the morning. There was no one else outside. Just a very strange patient looking inside at us. His eyes were completely black. Hospitals. Probably one of the places where we never want to be, but where all of us will eventually have to spend at least one night and then hopefully be able to go back home. These places are especially the setting for more ghost stories than we can imagine. And just think about the amount of energy, pain, joy as well, or death that they carry. In this episode, we go into a hospital in the early hours of the morning. But that's not all. More stories await tonight, so turn off the light and let yourself be carried away. You are listening to Relatos de la Noche. Good evening, everyone. I want to share something that happened to my sister and me when my grandfather was hospitalized a few years ago. I'm sharing this now because he's gone, but that doesn't mean I stopped thinking about what we saw in that hospital. In fact, it's one of those things you try to explain logically, but there are details that just won't fit no matter how much you think about it. My maternal grandfather was a very stubborn man, strong-willed, very hard-working, and very proud. And he was also distrustful of hospitals. He used to say that doctors nowadays just wanted to make money, and that if you let them, they'd keep you there until you died. Obviously, he didn't always think that way, but he did have a strong distrust of big hospitals, especially the new ones, and don't even get him started on public hospitals. That's why when he got seriously ill, he insisted on being taken to a private hospital he trusted, an old small one that had been running for decades, operating in the city, or rather surviving in the city. It wasn't a nice place at all, much less a modern one. It was one of those hospitals that from the outside looks like a big house that had been converted with strange extensions, narrow hallways, high windows, stained ceilings, and entire areas that had clearly been abandoned for years. But my grandfather said that there were real doctors there, that he had been well taken care of there on other occasions, and that if he was going to be hospitalized, it would be there or nowhere else. In the end, it was done his way. He was admitted because of a respiratory complication and because of a heart problem that came along with other age-related issues. He wasn't intubated or in intensive care, but he was still in fragile condition. He needed oxygen, monitoring, and several nights of observation. Since in my family we take turns caring for the sick, several of us organized ourselves so he wouldn't be left alone. My mom and my aunts would go during the day, and at night my sister and I would take turns because we lived closer. And to be honest, we were the ones who could handle staying up late the best. We could keep ourselves entertained on our phones all night. The hospital had 3 floors. The part that was still active was on the first floor and part of the second. There were occupied rooms, a small nurse's station, a waiting room with vinyl armchairs, green, cracked vinyl, and a tiny chapel with the empty space left by a small Virgin Mary statue and a light bulb that looked like it was about to burn out. But there was also another area in the back that was hardly used anymore. On the second floor, there was also another area in the back that was hardly used anymore. There was an old operating room there, 2 abandoned recovery rooms, and 2 closed rooms. You could tell because the lights were almost never on, and when you walked by, it smelled different, like dust and stale shut-in air. The doors had long, opaque windows, and behind some of them, you could still see furniture covered with sheets. Staying alone with my grandfather the first night was difficult, but not due to anything unusual. He hardly slept. He complained about the noise, the hallway light, the catheter, the food, the air conditioning temperature. It wasn't until around 1 in the morning that he finally calmed down. My grandfather was breathing with that short, tired sound that sick people make when they manage to get somewhat comfortable, and I stayed in an armchair next to the bed, looking at my phone, just trying not to fall asleep. The door to the room had a small rectangular window, not big, but big enough to see when someone walked by in the hallway. Nurses, relatives, a doctor, whoever it was. I had already gotten used to looking up every time I saw a shadow move on the other side. I don't know exactly what time it was when I saw him for the first time. It was likely after 3 in the morning. And I remember it because I had already noticed that the hospital felt different at that hour. There were no voices, no phones ringing, no frequent footsteps. I think even the people on the night shift went to sleep. Just the occasional beep from a machine, the wheels of a distant cart, and the hiss of my grandfather's oxygen. I saw someone pass by the small window. He wasn't moving fast or with the urgency the staff had. He was actually walking very slowly, as if he could barely move forward. At first, I thought he was a patient. In that hospital, sometimes you could see some patients walking around, especially those with IV drips hanging from them or who were disoriented. But never at that hour. And what was strange was how it looked. I managed to make out a completely smooth head, or at least that's how it seemed to me. Very pale. And an oxygen mask covering almost her entire face. Not a simple cannula like my grandfather's. It was a big, transparent mask, the kind I hardly ever see anymore, with a tube hanging down. I don't know why, but I stopped. I went to the door and peeked through the window. I saw the man farther away now across the hallway. He was moving toward the darker part. He was wearing something like a hospital gown or robe, very loose-fitting. He walked with his shoulders hunched. It seemed strange to me, yes, but not supernatural. The first thing I thought was that some nurse had let him move around on his own, and with how old the place was, anyone could end up disoriented, lost. I was about to open the door and alert the nurses' station, but then my grandfather made a sound like he was choking on his own saliva, and I forgot about the whole thing. I went with him. I adjusted his pillow and gave him some water with the straw. When I looked outside again, there was no one there anymore. The next morning, I didn't say anything because, honestly, I was embarrassed. It sounded silly. I saw a strange man walking at night. That's all. But the second time I saw him was 2 nights later. That time my sister was with me. We had arranged to stay together because my grandfather had had a bad day. We didn't want only one of us to stay up all night. She was dozing on the couch for a while. I'd gone out to get a coffee from the machine that was almost at the end of the hallway. When I was coming back, I saw him. He was coming from the end of the hallway. The same man from the other night. He was moving slowly, too slowly. Like someone very sick who should have been collapsing. But he wasn't collapsing. And the closer he got, the stranger he looked. The skin, or what I could see of it, had a dull color. It was somewhere between gray and bluish. The mask didn't seem to be properly fitted. Actually, it looked like it was embedded in his skin, stuck to his face, sunken in. His eyes looked very dark. I'm not sure if it was the light or if you just couldn't see them clearly. And his gown was open at the neck, showing a collarbone that was way too pronounced. He went into a room, and I hurried to catch up with my grandfather before I ran into that man, to take care of my grandfather, and so I wouldn't be alone. When I went in, I heard footsteps in the hallway again. Through the little window, I could see that the man was standing in front of our door. I thought he was going to come in with us by mistake, like so many disoriented patients, but he didn't. He stayed in front of the closed door, still. It seems he only looked at it and didn't knock or try to open it. He was just there standing, in profile from where I was, with his head slightly tilted toward the window. I don't know how long that lasted. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. To me, it felt like a long time. I felt a very particular discomfort. At that moment, he no longer seemed like just another patient to me. It wasn't normal to stay like that, motionless, in front of someone else's room at that hour. Then I thought something I was a bit embarrassed to admit. It was just the first thing I thought of. That's it. I've already psyched myself out. I'm already seeing ghosts in the hospital. I don't know why my mind went straight there. Maybe because of how ugly the man was. Maybe it's the place or just exhaustion. But I wasn't even that scared at that moment. It made me feel more of a kind of aversion, like this certainty that I didn't want that thing in front of my grandfather's room. So I got up. I opened the door suddenly, and there was no one there anymore. It's not that he had gone to one side. I didn't make him walk. The hallway was simply empty. I took 2 full steps outside. I checked both ways and saw nothing. I even checked the nurse's station and saw that it was empty. A nurse was coming up at that moment and asked me if I needed anything. And I, not wanting to seem crazy, told her no, that I was just stretching my legs. I returned to the room without telling my sister. I didn't want to because it seemed ridiculous. Besides, my grandfather was awake and I didn't want to worry him. He was one of those people who, if they heard something like that, would get stuck on it. I couldn't tell him that I thought I was seeing ghosts. The next night, the 2 of us stayed again. I fell asleep for a while because I just couldn't go on anymore, and my sister stayed awake. Around 4 in the morning, she woke me up in a strange way, sitting upright on the couch. That movement is what made me open my eyes. I saw her looking toward the door. I was going to ask her what was going on, but she gestured for me to stay quiet. She wasn't speaking. She was just pointing at the window on the door. I got up slowly and walked over. There it was again. Only this time it wasn't in front of our room, but a few meters ahead, in front of another room whose door was open. It was the room of an elderly man admitted that afternoon, as I recall. He didn't seem to have anyone with him at night, just a son who had stayed for a while and then left. The figure was still looking inside. My sister was breathing very softly. Then she told me almost in a whisper, "Do you see it?" I nodded yes. That was what unsettled me most about everything, knowing it wasn't just my imagination, that she saw it too, that it wasn't just a trick of sleep or exhaustion. I thought it was a patient, she told me without looking away. I didn't know what to say to her. A few seconds went by like that. The figure didn't come in or move. It just watched. And suddenly it leaned forward a little, like when someone tries to see better in a dark place. My sister stepped back and I felt that I didn't want to keep looking at it anymore. She was the first to step away. "I don't like it," she said. "Close it, please." I closed Grandpa's room door, though honestly, I'm not sure what we expected to change. My grandma was asleep, unaware of everything. We just stayed there without talking, just listening. I was waiting to hear footsteps or for someone to knock or anything. But what we heard was something else. First, a sharp thud. Then a noise like furniture or something being dragged. And right after, a desperate man's voice calling for help. It was a help me, but like someone choking, like someone who couldn't get enough air out. My sister went out before I did. I went after her. We saw that lady's room door wide open and a nurse running in. Then 2 more came up from the first floor. When we got closer, the patient was half sitting up in bed, coughing, flailing, gasping for air. His gown was disheveled and the tubes on the floor were tangled. They were trying to calm him down. I remember his face very well because he was beside himself. It wasn't the face of normal fear. He was pale with his eyes wide open, touching his neck. "He's choking me," he said. "No, he's choking me." One of the nurses told him to calm down, that it was probably just a nightmare, that there was no one else there, and to breathe slowly. "No, I wasn't asleep," he insisted. "It climbed on top of me. That man climbed on top of me. I quickly turned to the hallway. There was no one there anymore. The figure we saw was gone, not a trace of it left. A sleepy doctor arrived. They checked vital signs, raised the bed rail, and asked questions. My sister and I stood to the side, still. One of the nurses, who might have noticed the look on our faces, asked us if we had heard anything. My sister took a while to answer. I even thought she wouldn't say anything, but she did. "It's just that we saw a man standing out here," she said just before the patient screamed, but he looked very strange. He was wearing an oxygen mask. The nurse frowned. "And what was he like?" "Not very tall. Well, not that tall, but very thin, pale, wearing a gown. His head was, kind of hairless, and an oxygen mask," my sister said. The nurse looked at the other, as if expecting her to know who she meant. But the other one simply said that there was no patient like that. "But we did see him," I said then. "He also walked past my grandfather's room last night. There's someone like that here." Both of them fell silent for a moment. Then the first one told us something like we had probably seen a patient from another wing, but she didn't sound convinced. She requested a more detailed description. When my sister mentioned what the face looked like, that you couldn't really make out the features and that the mask seemed too big, the nurse's expression changed a little. I wouldn't say it was fear, but it was definitely discomfort. "Okay, please don't leave the room for now. And if you see anything else, let us know," he told us. We went back with my grandfather. We closed the door. We didn't turn off the light this time. That's when we finally spoke honestly, and it turned out it wasn't the first time my sister had seen it either. The night before, while I was sleeping for a while, she had managed to see a silhouette standing in front of our room. She didn't wake me because she assumed it was a patient. I told her what happened to me when I went to get my coffee about the door, how it disappeared when I looked out. Neither of us wanted to say ghost anymore, but we didn't have another word for it either. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. From then on, we stopped taking separate shifts. If one of us left, the other stayed awake. We even told my mom that we didn't want to leave Grandpa alone for even a minute, even if she said we were overreacting. We didn't share all the details with her since we knew how she is and didn't want her upset, but we told her enough to understand something was bothering us. The next 2 nights, we never saw it fully again, but things did happen that made us stay there on guard. One early morning, we heard someone trying to open the bedroom door, slowly, without knocking, just gently lowering the handle. I was awake, and so was my sister. We looked at each other simultaneously. The handle went down once. It sprang back. Then, again, it didn't open because we had put the lock on. I approached thinking it would be a nurse, but before I got there, the handle stopped moving just like that, just like the last time. And again, there was no one there. Out in the hallway with that ugly yellow light that some old hospitals have and the sound of a TV far away. Another time, my grandfather woke up startled, looking at the corner of the room where the spare oxygen tank was. He said to us, "What? Don't let that sick person in, please." I asked him who he was referring to, and he simply answered me that it was the man who couldn't breathe. But look, I want to explain to you that my grandfather was already medicated, very tired, and sometimes he got disoriented. I wanted to think that he had dreamed it, but when he said it, he didn't sound confused. He was very lucid, fully aware. He sounded annoyed, as if he had really seen someone in the room and didn't like it. What? My brother and I were already exhausted. During the day, we slept for a while, and at night, that tension of being alert to any noise would hit us again. We started insisting to my grandfather's doctor that as soon as possible, he should discharge him or move him to another hospital. He said not yet, that he had to complete his observation period, that he had improved, yes, but not enough. And we weren't going to tell him, take him out, because there's something that comes and stops outside the room. We weren't going. The last night was the worst. Not because there was an attack like the other man's, but because this time we felt very clearly that it was coming for my grandfather. I went to the bathroom while my sister stayed with him. When I came back, she was standing next to the bed, very stiff, not taking her eyes off the door. "What happened?" I asked her. She didn't answer me right away. She just pointed. The window on the door was level with my grandfather's bed, and behind that frosted glass you could make out a shadow, motionless. Not very well defined, but clearly human. And it was pressed against the door, standing there. My grandfather was already awake too. He breathed quickly, not turning toward the door. And he asked us not to open it, please. That was what affected me the most out of everything, Uriel. My grandfather's scared voice saying, "Don't open it for him." As if he knew perfectly well that there was someone on the other side. As if he had been feeling it for a while. The shadow didn't move. I grabbed a folding chair that was there, more out of instinct than anything else. My sister stood by my grandfather's bedside and grabbed the remote to call the nurse, but the call wouldn't go through. I'm not sure if it malfunctioned, if she didn't press it right, or if my memory is exaggerating, but it made me really anxious at the time. The door handle started to go down. Slowly. Really slow. As if on the other side, someone was lowering it carefully so as not to make any noise. My heart was beating really fast. My sister was crying silently. My grandfather was breathing worse and worse. And then, without thinking, I opened it first. I know I shouldn't have done it, but I did. The door opened outward, and I saw him less than a meter away. Everyone. I will never forget it. And still, I feel like any description falls short. That does look like a patient. He's wearing an open, dirty hospital gown. His chest is very sunken. His skin is oddly colored between ashen and purple. His head was smooth, but not like a normal shaved head. It was as if the skin was too tightly stretched over his skull. His eyes looked dark, deep, and fixed. And the mask, the oxygen mask, was the worst part. It didn't seem to be placed on his face. It seemed like it was already inside him, as if his mouth had swallowed it, and yet it was still connected to a tube that hung down, going nowhere. He didn't attack me. He was just there. But he raised a hand, very slowly, and the dark one pointed inside. I'm almost sure that's my grandfather's bed. I don't know where I got the strength, but I turned to my side, grabbed a chair that was nearby, and threw it at him. But in that split second, he disappeared. When I turned to throw it, there was no one there anymore. The chair hit the hallway wall and fell, making a horrible noise. That thing didn't vanish in front of me like in a movie. It simply stopped being there the very instant the chair passed, as if it had disappeared while I was turning around. In a split second. 2 nurses came out, alarmed by the noise from the chair, and then an orderly. My sister was already tearfully telling them what had happened. I couldn't even speak properly. My grandfather was still agitated but conscious. One of the nurses, whom I hadn't seen before, came very close to me and asked me, "Was it the man with the mask?" I told her yes. She didn't pretend not to know what I was talking about. She turned to one of her co-workers and told her, "Please call the doctor." I don't know what stories that hospital had or what they knew. They never told me. And we didn't insist too much either, because at that point, we just wanted to get my grandfather out of there. Leave. The next morning, since he woke up feeling better, my family agreed. They signed what was needed and took him, despite recommending another day. My grandfather got stubborn too. He said he no longer wanted to stay there. And honestly, no one contradicted him this time. The following days I stayed at home. Little by little, he started eating better, sleeping, and getting his color back. I never asked him directly if he also saw something that night. Only once, a long time later, I mentioned to him that at the hospital, you could feel something very strange in the air at night in the early morning, especially around 3 o'clock. Hey, there were a lot of things there. I ended up seeing more than I would have liked. That was all he said, and nothing more was needed. My sister and I hardly talked about it for a while. When we finally did, we agreed on very specific things about that man's appearance. Even details we hadn't told each other that morning. The shape of the mask, the sunken chest, the way he stood still in front of the doors, and the very clear feeling that he wasn't just going down aimlessly, but searching. I know someone could say that the anxiety, the stress, and the fear from seeing my grandfather like that, could have made us imagine things, and if it had only been me, maybe I would accept that. But 2 of us saw it. Searching. A patient almost died that night, saying someone was choking him. My grandmother spoke to that patient before we told her anything. Searching. The nurses definitely knew exactly what I meant when I mentioned the mask. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was someone who died there, someone who got trapped in that hospital, or if it's something worse. I just know that it's roaming the rooms in the early morning, around 3 o'clock, looking inside, as if it's waiting for the right moment to come in. And I also know that if we hadn't been there with my grandfather those nights, I wouldn't have been at ease thinking about what could have happened if the man with the mask had found the door open. Dear community, thank you for still being here. We hope you don't have any horror stories in a hospital, but if you do, please share them with us. We'd really love to do a compilation on that, but we don't have that many stories yet. In the next episode, we're going to announce the winners of the giveaway. You already know you can still participate. Go to the previous episodes to find out how, so you can win an autographed book. Thank you. And remember, if you don't have it yet, we're going to leave a link in the description. We had been told that it was no longer available, that it showed up as unavailable on Amazon, but it looks like they have some copies available again. And if you find it in a bookstore, share with the community where it was so that if someone is nearby, they can go buy it. But now it's time to continue. There's still one more story left tonight. Hello, Uriel. Good evening to you and everyone. Thank you for letting me be part of Relatos a la Noche. I wanted to share something that happened to me in the house where I grew up, although actually it all started before I was born. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. When I came into the world, my siblings were already 16 and 18 years old, so I basically grew up as an only child. They were already in another stage of their lives, going out with friends, studying away from home, and I spent most of my time dreaming. The house where we lived had a large yard. It wasn't particularly beautiful, but it had a pretty big fig tree that gave a lot of shade. That tree had always been there, even before my parents bought the house. It was really huge, as big as a fig tree can grow. When I was a child, I remember that many times I would hear a boy crying in the yard. It didn't happen all the time, but it was frequent enough to catch my attention. It was a very soft cry, and suddenly it sounded as if a little boy was calling out to someone. One time I told my mom, I told her that there was a boy crying outside. My mom wasn't surprised. I remember that perfectly. She didn't run out or anything like that. She just calmly got up, closed the curtains, and told me I should go to my room to rest and turn on the TV. I saw her take a small bottle from a cabinet by the door and go out to the yard. And this happened a couple more times. I would hear something, tell her. My mom would close the curtains, go for the bottle, and go outside. And I would stay inside waiting. After a few minutes, my mom would return and everything would be quiet, and I assumed that the boy had left. Like I said, this happened several times while I was growing up, but I never thought much about it. Back then, it was just something strange. It wasn't until I was older, many years later, that my brother decided to tell me something. One night we were talking, and the topic of the house came up. The house. That's when he told me that before I was born, they had experienced some very strange things in that yard. He said that when they were young, he and my other brother also heard a child crying. But not just one. They almost always heard several. He said it sounded like a small choir of scared children back there. And they didn't just hear them. The worst part was that they actually saw them. Especially one of them, the one they both could see. According to him, it was a boy who peeked out from behind the fig tree. A very small boy, about 4 or 5 years old. He never came out completely. He always stayed half hidden behind the tree, as if he wanted to be seen, but at the same time didn't. My brothers told my parents about it many times when they were kids, but at first, no one believed them. One day, my dad decided to see for himself if anything was strange there. My brothers kept telling him that the boy always hid in the same place, behind the fig tree. So my dad took a shovel and started digging right there. He found nothing at first, but kept digging. A little over 1 meter deep, the shovel hit something hard. When he brushed the dirt aside, he saw a bone. He got so scared that he dropped the shovel. He called the police. They arrived, and simply by pulling it out, they confirmed it was human remains. The remains of a child? The investigators searched the entire yard because it was already clear that it hadn't ended up there by accident. When they continued digging in other parts of the yard, they found another set of bones. Another child. They said the remains had been buried there for over 50 years. Long before my parents bought the house, they couldn't find anyone responsible. The people who had lived there at that time had already died, so the case was closed. After that, my parents decided to cover the whole yard with cement. They wanted to forget what had happened there. For many years, the house was peaceful. until sometime later I heard something again. But my brother told me something else. He told me that he thought I heard that crying when I was a child because there was probably another child, one they never found, and maybe that's why some nights you can still hear it, as if someone were calling from the yard, as if someone still wanted to come in.